and I welcome you to the fourth little Blender session. Let's start with a little review from last week, and then I didn't get very much feedback on what's interesting, but I think I found enough stuff that will keep us busy for this week. So let's have a look at Blender Basics 3. So we started by adjusting the camera to make a render of Suzanne. And there's a few tricks. One is Control-Alt-0, where you can just align.
You're not sharing your screen yet, Vernon.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Okay. So last week we learned this little trick about changing the camera angles. The old school one is Control-Alt-0, which aligns your view to wherever you're placed at right now. So you can see now my camera moved from one place to another, just like this. But then we also saw that there's this little button in the view panel, in the numerical panel under view, camera to view. So once I'm in camera view and I check this little icon, I can zoom Penny and Dolly around, and this will move my camera. And usually I turn this off once I don't need it anymore. This was this one. Then we applied a material, and we learned about the amazing principled shader. But then, and we saw that we can change the viewport shading up to like a rendered view, which is different in Eevee and in Cycles, where Eevee is like the real-time renderer that doesn't have all the features, and Cycles is like the physically correct render engine that takes a bit longer but makes better quality images. Then we saw that we can change the size of the picture that we're going to render, and can change the file type. We learned a bit about like including the alpha channel. We changed our light to a spotlight, so we just went over here and selected our light and said spotlight. And then we learned about the 3-point light, which is like a classic in photography and also in 3D animation. So this is like the classical setup of 3-point light. And now I have to find back to my screen and back to this one. Then we entered into the shader editor, and we deleted the principled and replaced it with a simpler shader, just like a diffuse shader, I think it was. And we realized that actually the principled shader is just a collection of various shaders that we have available in Blender. I will quickly go to the shader editor, hit N for hiding this, and Shift A and go to shaders, and we can see all kinds of predefined shaders. Like those are usually written in C or in C++. Like there's special shader, how do you say, languages. Like if you're interested in shaders, you could try something like Shader Toy, which is something that I quickly want to show you. So this runs in the browser, and it's like a place where you can write your own shaders. It's super interesting. Like, yeah, but it's more like this one is quite friendly. There's less friendly ones, but this is something you're interested, I would recommend you look. And then we applied an environment texture, so that our glossy Suzanne has something to reflect. And we quickly learned about HDR imagery, and we went to HDRI Haven, and downloaded a texture so we can illuminate and make reflections on our model at the same time. Then we had a quick look into animation and then into particles. So maybe for the ones that were not present, yeah, I'm not going to repeat everything. But yeah, so the I key is the famous, the important one for setting keyframes. And you can set keyframes on either on many things at once. I say location, rotation, scale, then I make 9 keyframes at once. But you can also set keyframes just by, for example, the location of my camera. I could just right-click on my location x-axis and said add keyframe, which would only add 1 keyframe for the x location of my camera. Then we had a quick look through particles, where I got a bit lost because I'm a bit out of training with the particles. I hope this was kind of interesting anyway. I recommended you to have a look at the demo files, and I still do. So if you go to blender.org, and I think you have to navigate to download, and then there's a tab called demo files, and you can download some fantastic scenes. Like this is all included. For those, you need a computer that is like slightly above average, but you can try with a normal laptop. But you will realize that this might take a while for opening those files, and most of those are using Eevee. So when you go to the rendered view, you really see something like this, and you learn about light setup, yeah, modeling, and you can steal all the models. So forget the name of this lady, but it's a beautiful model, and you can just, for example, take her head or her hands and adjust them to your own needs. And this is one of the big benefits of Blender, that there's so much material available for free and really high quality stuff. So this is probably the best way to learn by looking at other people's files. Okay, and I think that's it for the review. And you had some questions last time that I quickly want to answer. So one of them was, I told you that if you hit GZZ, then this will move the camera in local coordinates, just as if you're changing here to local. But then what will happen if you don't know what the local coordinate system is? And if you go to object properties, which is this one, the square, and then you go into viewport display, you can turn on axis, and this will show you the local coordinate system, which is very useful in some cases. Like for the cube, you can expect that E is probably up, but many times you want to know what the actual coordinate system looks like, and this works for all objects under object properties, viewport display, axis. You could also turn on the name of objects, and you can decide. Sometimes you have geometry that is quite heavy, so you don't want to really see the whole object, but because this would be maybe too heavy for your graphics card. And in this case, you could say, okay, all I want to see is just the bounds, and I don't actually want to see the object. And yeah, this would be one of those tricks. Now I don't see where I can hide it completely. Yeah. Okay. And then there was a question. I render Suzanne so that she's transparent, and I will just make a quick render. Let's turn this one back to normal. So I don't want to see the bounding box. And I will delete the cube and have a look through my camera and quickly turn on camera to view so we can put Suzanne in a good picture. And if I hit, since we have a spotlight, I will add a plane so we can see the shadow from the spotlight. So if I go to render view now, we can see that, that there's a shadow. And I might want to add, first I have to turn off the camera to view. And then I will add another spotlight, just a little bit better. And I will not render the shadow from the spotlight. Uncheck shadow. And maybe I make it a bit brighter. Okay, so now we still have a shadow. And we see Suzanne. And if I hit render now, actually I will quickly reduce my render size a little bit so we don't have to wait so long. But if I render now, you see that the background is gray. By the way, you can adjust the background color. You go to the shader editor and select world. This is our background color. So if I make this red, you get a red background, and it's also emitting red light. But there's nothing transparent. So if I save this as a PNG, I can't see anything from the alpha channel. And the trick for making this look right in the render is you go to render settings, and you scroll down where it says film, and there you check transparent. So now everything that's background will be rendered as transparent. Here you can see it as those little squares that we know from Photoshop. For some reason, I will make this a bit darker. And yeah, so now if I render, now if I hide the floor and render Suzanne like this, no, I can't hide it. I would have to move it to another layer. Oh, we haven't talked about the collections yet. And the shortcut for working with layers, now they're called collections, is the M key. So if you hit M, you can choose to move it to one of those existing collections or to make a new collection. I make a new one and call it Susie. Okay. Yeah. And now I can just hide this collection. And if I render now, I get Suzanne with a transparent background. But let's say that we want to, because now we don't see anything from the shadow anymore, and Suzanne is kind of hanging in there, which is not exactly what we want. Because if you want to composite this into another picture somewhere, you want the shadows so that stuff feels like it has physicality to it. And so there's a trick that only it works very well in cycles. In Eevee, there is a trick, like I put you a link here somewhere where you can redo it with nodes or cycles. But if you're rendering in Eevee, you can use what is called a shadow capture. So we go to the object properties of, in this case, the plane. And so I have the plane selected, and this should be my, where are my object properties, world properties. Here. Object properties. And there's like a spot where it says shadow capture. I think it's in, or I can't even follow my own documentation. So I am in cycles, am I? This is why I don't see it. So I have to switch to cycles and then go to the object property. Object properties. And then I check shadow catcher. So I should add visibility here. So if I render now, I get a picture where I don't see the plane, but I see the shadow that is being cast on the plane. And maybe for making this a bit quicker, I already pre-rendered this. Let's put it in here. So you get something like this. Everything's transparent, but you can see the shadow. And of course, now you could add another layer that I could fill in red. And I could move this behind Suzanne. Yeah. Okay. I managed to make a plane that is not moving. This might be an issue of WebEx. Sometimes WebEx makes trouble. No idea. I can move this. Oh yeah. So now I have the red layer behind, but we can still see our shadow. And now I could go and change the color of my layer to anything I want. And I would still have a nice picture of Suzanne. So let's say you want to integrate a 3D render on a website, or you want to put it into like a real photo so that it looks kind of real, then of course you will want the shadow. And where's the fill tool? Oh, I hated that they changed all the icons in GIMP. Now I can't even, it's a bucket, no? Here. So now I can change the color and this still looks right. This one is still rendering, but you can see transparency and the shadow. Double it. If you want to cancel a render, you have to hit escape twice. Once for stopping the render, and a second time for closing the window that appears. Okay, so here's the link that I have to fix for how to do this in Eevee. And we also had a quick talk about the normals. So I told you that scalar and along normals is something that people use, and but I couldn't anymore where the how do you say, where to show the normals, because this was changed like several times. So for seeing the normals nowadays, you have to go into overlay, and you have to be in edit mode. So you go into edit mode, go to overlays, and then down here you can turn on, let's put on the face normals. Like that's the ones that are vertex normals. You just have all of them, and you can also have these normals that go between each face. But face normals is mostly what you want, and you can also change the size of them, so you can make them look quite funny. But sometimes you might have a mesh where one of the normals is inverted, which gives you a weird look in your render. But you can go to mesh normals and say flip. So now I flipped the normal of this face, and you can see now there's nothing pointing out in the middle, which would be an indication that something's wrong. And if I go back to object mode, I don't realize much wrong. As soon as I apply a subdivision surface modifier, this will start to look weird. Can you tell that this face, there's something wrong? Looks kind of squarish, even if I shade it smooth. Oh yeah, if I shade it smooth, it's really visible, but something's wrong here. And most of the time you can fix this by selecting everything and going to mesh, normals, recalculate outside. So like this, Blender will try to orient the normals so that they're all pointing in the outside direction. This works most of the time. You probably have a geometry issue as well. But if your geometry is right and you recalculate normals, everything should be fine. And in the worst case, you could even perfect the normals. Okay, so that's it for the recap and the questions from last time. Do you have any questions today? I think Antonio had one.
Ferdi, it's a very. I didn't follow all your presentations. I have a really very simple question to make, but I think it's. I will send you a file and you will answer me personally. Just for now, for us not to lose time with something so simple. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe talking about simple stuff. Like one of the usual problems that people have with extruding is when you have a cube and you extrude a face. Let me turn off my normals again. Okay. And then I told you the trick that if you wanted to make a hole, you would extrude, but then right click or hit escape for canceling the extrude. And then you scale in, and then you could make the hole. But if you do this extrude cancel, and then you just continue working, you don't really see that there's something wrong here. And you will only start seeing this once you apply a subdivision surface modifier, or once you try to edit this in more detail. Here it's not very visible, but there is a double face in here. And right now, I don't know how to make this visible apart from the X-ray. Because there should be like a dot in the middle of this face that I can't see right now. Let's do it again. So I extrude, cancel, extrude. You can tell that there's a dot in here, whereas a regular face wouldn't have one. So here we have some duplicate faces that might make our life difficult. And one good trick to resolve this is to go to vertex select mode, and I think it's in mesh, merge, and then you go by distance. And now it tells me that 8 vertices have been removed. Because I have a very small distance, so it will only remove vertices that are exactly in the same spot. And so 2 times 4 faces were duplicated. And by merging by distance with a very low value, I can just remove everything that is duplicated. And this will hopefully fix some problems. Okay, any more questions?
I write one in the chat. But I had some problems with beveling.
Ah, yeah. So beveling is how to bevel the edge of a rectangle proportional. So maybe
Yeah.
if I just quickly show you the there are several ways of beveling. Let's take a cube, and if I just select an edge, and right now I don't know the shortcut, so I will just use the
Steuerung B. Steuerung B. Control B.
Yeah. Another way would be F3, and you type bevel, and then it tells me Control B. So I hit Control B, and this allows me to make a chamfer. But if I scroll my mouse wheel at the same time, I will make more subdivisions, so I get a rounded edge. You can change between just a straight bevel and a chamfer and a bevel by turning your mouse key. There's also the Bevel Modifier. And let me see if I can find this one. There's this modifier, and to be honest, I would have to inform myself a bit more of how the Bevel Modifier works. Right now, it looks like as if it's just beveling all the edges. I'll make this a bit bigger. Be able to see. Yeah, well, it's not really increasing a lot, but right now we're at 5 meters, which should be like twice the size of our cube. And it's also just, no, yeah, it does. And here we can probably also change the number of segments for making it rather round than completely square. Let's just try something a bit bigger. Yeah, it doesn't really go much bigger. I don't know why. Maybe, yeah, this was the issue. And of course we have to shade smooth. So now we have everything rounded. Like rounding objects is not always very easy. Like software like Creo is very good at that. Fusion is completely crap at making rounds. Like if there's anything that goes that like if you try to make a 5mm round over like a 4mm material, it will just fail and tell you that it's impossible. Creo wouldn't care about this. It would even bevel your whole object away. But Blender is very primitive when it comes to rounding stuff. So I showed you two ways. And then there's this Bevel Modifier, and then there's another render option where you can tell the engine to round all edges. Because if you want to make a render that looks kind of photorealistic, since in nature hardly anything is like perfectly round, perfectly square. This round everything a little bit render setting allows you to get all highlights on the corners that make stuff look a lot more realistic than without it.
Ferdinand?
Yeah.
I have the problem to bevel an edge of an rectangle. To make it with a cube is not so difficult, but when I do it with a quader, then I have the problem it's not proportional.
Yeah. Like Blender is not the best program for rounding edges. It's like before Blender had this plugin, and people used to make rounds by simply adding a sphere. No, is this a sphere? Yeah. So you would take your sphere, and let's say I want a rounded corner on some object that has two edges that come close to each other. So you would just take a sphere and cut away what you don't need.
Brincar para ver o que é que tu achas. É amargo. Eu tenho como centeio. Não sei, mas isso só tem um coisinho de centeio.
Maybe people that are not talking right now should mute their microphone. And so this would give me like a kind of corner shape. And let me see how to select this properly. So I B middle click for deselecting those. And now I could extrude this corner and this corner. And this would give me a rounded edge. And this way you also have very fine control over how your edges actually look like. Yeah. Nowadays, like, since this is kind of like a lot of work to do each time, if you go to extra objects, you can already insert like a beveled cube as a starting point. So you can just scale it and arrange it like this. Yeah, so in the worst case, you just have to design your beveled edges yourself, which is, yeah, not so much fun, but the good thing about Blender is it's always, you can always do it. In the worst case, you have to hand stitch it from scratch. Okay, I hope, like, I know that this was not really an answer to your question. My answer is like, if you have something that is really complicated, rounded, try another software, or get good enough in modeling in Blender that you can just model it from scratch. Like the Bevel Modifier and the Bevel tool are nice to have, but they won't really like, I bet if I see it's very easy to confuse it. So now I'm like already this, which should be simple. Let me see if I can just select this edge, Control B. Oh yeah, this would actually work. Oh yeah, but then once you go a bit further, it makes some weird geometry. Yeah. So the Bevel Modifier is nice for easy stuff, but once it gets more complicated, you will get like complicated problems with like overlapping geometry. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that I could answer right now?
Yes, I have another question.
Yeah.
I tried to join two objects, but yeah, I had it's the experience they are not really joined, only logical, and yeah, I needed to join them absolute. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe as an example, I will take this cube, and
Yeah.
also I will duplicate it, Shift D. So now I have a copy, but I will escape so that it stays in the same place. And I hit Control. Maybe this is WebEx interfering. Like, where's the mirror gun? I'm quite sure it was Control M. Mirror here. So I want to mirror across global X. So object mirror X global. So now I have this mirrored copy of my first cube, and I will just place it like roughly next to the other one. And now I can go select the two and hit Control J. Actually, let me quickly turn on my screencast key so that you can actually see what I'm doing. Why are they not showing up? Here. Now you get this little icon again. And so now they're one mesh, but there's still a gap between them. And let's say if I wanted to join those two, Of course, normally I would do this with a mirror modifier that automatically joins the meshes, but just for explaining the problem, so first I have to get rid of those two faces so that I don't get interior faces. So I X faces, delete the faces, so now I can look inside. But those are still not joined together, and I could select this edge loop, the Alt click, so it will ring select all of those, and use the snapping tools for vertex. And if I move them in X direction, so G, X, I could try to move this as close. Oh, I'm not snapping. So now I can G, X, and snap them together. Actually, there is a function where you can just auto-join everything that lies in the same spot. But right now I don't remember. Like maybe it's in merge. There is an auto merge. Yeah, I will put this in the documentation. So now it looks closed, but it isn't. So if I just select one of those vertices and move it, I can see I'm opening a hole. And if I want to really join those together, I select everything and I do my merge by distance. And now I have to be careful. If I put a distance that is too big, it will start merging those together because they're really close. But I didn't catch the message. Like normally there's a little message popping up that tells me how many vertices were removed. But since I did the merge by distance, I would assume that those are actually welded together now. And I can try by just, no, it's still moving. So once again, mesh, merge, by distance. And I would increase this a little bit. Now you can see it already starts merging other stuff. But yeah, so still doesn't look right. It's because I have. Yeah. Sorry, I have to join them again. Select them all, mesh, merge by distance. It doesn't say anything here. It's strange. But I guess this is, oh yeah, now you see, now they're actually joined. There's no hole opening. And this is one object without a seam now. And I could even go so far, select this edge and say, just hit the X key and say, dissolve edges. And now it's completely joined.
Probably I forgot to dissolve the edges.
Yeah, this is not necessary. Like the important step is the remove. It used to be called remove doubles. Now it's merge by distance, and then you put a small value. Okay,
Ferdi.
so let's start.
Ferdi?
Antonio?
Ferdi, it's Antonio. Let me thank you. Thanks for Florian, because it was my doubt. So it took my it was my issue. Thank you, Florian.
Yeah.
Perfect.
De nada.
Okay. Anything else, or should we start getting into what was my topic for today? I wanted to start with UV texturing. Ready for texturing? Okay. So I'll start with a new file. And I want to explain you like if you want to put a picture onto your 3D model, you face the problem that your object is like 3-dimensional and your picture is just 2D. So how are we gonna do this? And the answer is we have to unwrap it. And the easiest example would be a cube. So how can we put a cube flat on the table? Answer is we have to cut it in some places. And if we take, I will divide the window and switch here to the UV editor window. And if I enter into edit mode, we can see that Blender's cube is already unwrapped. So somebody already included the UV coordinates in the file for the cube. And this is a term that you might want to remember. So some mesh formats are able to include this UV unwrap in its file. STL is not capable of doing this, but for example, OBJ can include texture coordinates in a file. So if you open an OBJ file and you go into edit mode, you should see a UV map. This might make a big difference on the quality of this file you just received. So it might happen that they forgot to include the UV map in the file. So you should quickly call and say like, hey, your OBJ doesn't have a UV map. So you should add it. If you like normally like up till recently the normal cube would look a bit simpler. The magic key is the U key, like U like UV mapping. And if I hit this one, I get this little menu. And if I say reset, then this is what the standard UV map looked like in Blender for a cube until recently. Which means that each face is just a square. And here we have like 8 squares lying on top of each other. And if I add a picture to this, then all the faces will show the same picture. Which is not exactly what we want. We would love to have something where we can, at least in some corners, have a transition that goes from one face to the next. So let's start by unwrapping this cube ourselves.
Question, but could you show again how did you get to the menu on the side? How did you get here?
Yeah, I will start from scratch. So we have the default cube. I go on the corner and I divide my window. So they have 2 windows. One is the 3D view and one I switch to UV editor. Yeah. I think this was the step missing. And on the left side, I enter into edit mode. And now I can see the UV map. And for the sake of explanation, I will move my mouse in the 3D view and hit the U key and reset the UV layout. Just for showing you the steps for making your own UV layout. And I hope I didn't lose anybody on the way.
Yes,
Lucia?
you lost me. I have the cube and I have the UV screen now, but there is no cube in there or nothing. So.
Did you select everything?
Not yet, I think. So yeah. Oh. I didn't select. Yeah, I get what I need to do. Yep.
Yeah, and then you hit U and you say reset. This is just for practicing. And then it shouldn't look like a cross anymore, but it's just like a square.
Thank you.
So if you select an edge and hit Control E, so that's the 2 important shortcuts for today. Control E and the U key. Yeah, I should quickly edit this. add this to my documentation. Where are we? Simulation mark scene, and U is the unwrap. Okay. So now we, for texturing our cube, we want to lay it flat, and so we have to define some cut marks, just as if it was made from paper, and we want to make some cuts so that we can lay it flat. And the shortcut is Control E. At least that's what I thought. No. That's wrong. Control E. Okay, something's wrong with my Blender. I will. Control E.
Control E for Bevel you just demoed a few minutes ago?
This was Control B, and Control E should give me a little pop-up. Let me make a new file, and save, edit mode, select an edge, Control E. So this is the one I want. Okay, let's just do it from the menu. So I go to Edge, Mark Scene, and now my edge gets like a little red line. And now you can puzzle for yourself, like which way to cut the cube. Try Control E. This should work. It just doesn't work in my case. Yeah, for Loish it works. But I just do it like this. Control E. Yeah. Yeah. For some reason my Control E is unresponsive. Yeah. So I do it edge mark seam, and I have to do it one by one, because if I select more than one edge, then it might get confused, because our object is so simple that there's not much that we can. Yeah, it will quickly select the whole loop. And what else do we need?
Ferdi, you are going to select all the vertices, all the edges?
All the ones we need for laying it flat. Like
Okay.
if you think about it, like where would you cut for laying it flat?
Okay.
Now I could open this one, then it will hinge around this part and up to here, and then connect it to the middle one. So I think this is the easiest cuts we need for being able to open it. So I go back to my UV editor, and I select everything, the A key. First I reset it so that I delete, actually the job was already done, but I was just looking for something simple to practice. And now if I hit U and then unwrap, I get this, which is not what I wanted. So let's see what I did wrong. So those, oh yeah, I made one cut too much. This one goes around here. Yeah, I don't need this one. And for removing a seam, I go to clear seam. Now I try again, unwrap, and now I get this T shape. I could choose to put this square up here, so it would look like a cross. But this is a completely valid unwrap for a cube. And now I could take a picture and put it on, and I would have a seamless texture that goes all along this one ring, and yeah, has as little cuts as we can have for a cube. Does this work for you? skeptical faces. Yeah, it's not crucial to follow this exactly. The main idea that I wanted to bring across is that you can select an edge and go to Edge Mark Scene for defining those cut marks.
Can you just please repeat, once you mark the edges, how do you show it in the UV window?
So I am in edit mode, and
Yeah.
I am in face select mode. Up here you can choose between vertex, edge, and face select. I'm in edge select, and I select an edge, and then it should normally be Control E, but in my case I have to go to edge and then to mark scene.
Yeah, sure. But once you're done, how do you see result in the UV screen? What did you do to see the result?
Ah, yeah. You select everything in the left view, and then you hit the U key, and you say unwrap.
Unwrap. Okay, thank you.
And let's say I wanted the classical cross shape, then I would have to make a cut here. Control E doesn't work. Edge mark scene, and I would have to remove this one. Edge view scene, and now I should get. Oh, still get the same. Okay. This one goes da. Maybe I have to move this one. Here's the marking. Everything selected. E key, U key, unwrap. Ah, yeah. And now I have the classical shape. But yeah, so this is a very simple example. Let's move on to some more complicated stuff. I think it was Nadi that had a quite nice model for Fab Academy that she tried to texture, which didn't really work. Which the reason was that it didn't have UV coordinates, so the materials she found online didn't really work, and the lack of a UV map was the issue. Yeah, maybe just for quickly showing you, if you go up here to image, you can choose new, which allows you to create an image inside Blender. And in this case, it's 1024 by 1024. It's black. It has an alpha channel, and there's no content. It's just plain black. But we can choose to render like a predefined UV grid, and this is something that people use a lot for just for testing if their UV layout is good or not. If I say OK, Blender generated this checker map with like colorful crosses, and this is a good way for checking your UV layout. So over here, I leave edit mode, and I go to the materials. Right now we don't see the texture because our material doesn't have a texture applied yet. So I will switch, but I have a material applied already to the cube. I just checked by clicking on the material properties. And what I'm missing now is the texture for the base color. So I go to the shader editor. I hit the N key for hiding this window. And now I want to add my picture, which I do by hitting Shift A, texture, image texture. And I just wait a second so that everybody can catch up. Shift A, texture, image texture, which gives me this node. And I will connect color to the base color just by clicking and dragging the yellow little dots. And now I could just open a picture from my hard drive, or I could choose the picture that we just generated, which was this UV map that is still called Untitled. And now my cube already has a material. Yeah. And I can switch to the material preview, or how's it called? The viewport shading material preview. And now we can see our cube with our texture on it. I go back to the UV editor and I switch into edit mode over here. You can see the way that our UV map perfectly aligns with the map. And if I wanted to make the squares bigger or smaller, I could just scale the size of my UV map. So since this is a tiling texture that just repeats infinitely in all directions, I can just scale my UV map. But don't worry, this is nothing wrong if your UV layout is bigger than your picture. It would just mean that your picture gets repeated in all directions in order to cover your whole UV layout. And now you see if I move my UV layout over here, it will move my texture on the other side. And I could try to align it nicely, but yeah, that's not really necessary. And I can scale it to any size. If I wanted to have just a few squares, I could try to make it fit like this.
Sorry, Ferdy, to interrupt. I thought you were explaining some issue that somebody had, but we all had to follow this. So I lost you. I mean, I created this grid, and then I was supposed to add material. I think you were showing, but I didn't follow that. So can you please repeat?
Yeah. So you have the UV layout, no?
I have UV layout. I made the grid, new image, made a grid.
Okay.
And then you went to material. You had material, but didn't have anything. So
yeah. So I went to materials just for checking if I have a material. If you don't have one, you just click on new. And then I switched this view to be the shader editor.
Okay.
And I double check if it says object up here.
Yeah.
And now I go to add texture, image texture.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I click on this drop down on the left, I can choose the picture that we created.
Okay.
Connect the color output, the base color of the cube. And of course I could select any picture here. Let me see if I have a picture. Maybe I have one for the Blender course. So what this is. Oh yeah, this was the picture of the train that made me learn Blender. I can choose this one here. And we go to edit mode. I can change the size of my UV layout. And now we can see that along one direction, the image continues over this edge, and then there's the break because of our cut. Okay, Branko?
Yeah, so I did add I linked the color with the principal shader, right? And then what I need to do after that?
So you connected color to base color?
Yeah.
And you have a picture in here?
Yes, something untitled, yeah.
Yeah, first we took this one.
I have something else I call, it's also Untitled, but for me it's in color. I have a colored gray grid.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
And then you only have to switch in the viewport, switch on rendered or on material preview, so you can see the texture on your cube. Does this work?
Just a sec. Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, maybe maybe we can actually take Nadi's object for showing the how this looks for more complicated objects. So this should, maybe it's still in my recent files. Then the puzzle box. So this is Nadi's file, and if you just hit render, actually I'll simplify the render settings a little bit so we don't have to wait so long. So I will reduce the settings because we don't really care. She's using a transparent material that does what is called Caustics. So Caustics is, you know, when you're like snorkeling in the sea and you look to the, let's say you're close to the beach and you, it's a sunny day and you're diving with your head underwater and you look on the ground, on the sand, you see this colorful patterns that look kind of awesome. That's what they call caustics. So it's like the light that gets refracted on the water surface, like a lens or like the opposite. And this is what produces these patterns. And so Blender can simulate this. Or if you take a prism and you shine some light on it, you will get the separation into various colors, and that's caustics. So Blender can simulate this as well. So you could actually, in cycles, you could make a physical simulation where you place a prism and you put a directional light, and it would give you the same effect than in real life where you see the whole rainbow. Yeah, problem is that on a computer this takes a lot longer than in real life, and Caustics is very computational intensive, so I'll turn it off for the moment because we don't really need it. And actually I will also make a new collection just for this little test. So I moved just the top surface into a new layer. So now I can hide all the other layers, and now I only get this one piece that was giving her trouble. And if I hit F12, maybe before hitting F12, I will reduce the render size a little bit. And now if I hit F12, it renders an object that is kind of pink. And whenever you render something and it's pink, it means that Blender can find the image texture. And this is one problem that I also wanted to address. So if you send somebody, you just saw that we created some images and we linked to an image that is somewhere on your hard disk. And if you just take your Blender file and you send it to somebody, if they don't have the same images in the same location, you will get pink objects. One way to solve this is to go before saving your Blender file, you go to File, External Data, and you say Pack All into Blend. And what Blender will do is will take all your images and include them in the Blender file. And if you send it to somebody, they can just take it and render, and it will look fine. And they could also say that they want to, because then you get very big Blender files. Maybe you have some 4K images in there. If somebody says, okay, the file is nice, but it's too big with all the images, then they can unpack all the textures. So Blender will ask you, okay, there's like 20 images in this blend file. Where do you want me to put them? And it will put them in the folder that you tell it and tidy everything up in the background. And that's very nice. You can also choose if the paths are relative or absolute. And you can, for example, here, and it tells me that there's a material called wood spec that couldn't be found. So this is why we get it in pink. So for fixing this, so this is the node setup that Nadi made for rendering some wood. And here I see an image texture, and there's no preview, which means that this picture is Blender can find it. So I will just take another picture. I think this is the first wood that I could find. And you might have to do the same down here. You see when the image is there, it shows you a little preview. And now if I render it, it's not pink anymore, but it still doesn't look right. And this is because we're missing the UV texture. So I go and I switch one of my views. I go to the UV editor and I enter into, right now you just have to watch because you don't have the file, but this is just a quick explanation because you will definitely stumble upon this problem. So I selected everything and I can see there's nothing showing up in the UV editor, which means this file doesn't have a UV layout. Probably it's because it came from Fusion and Fusion doesn't generate a UV layout for you. So how do we get a UV layout from this? And you saw that if I hit the U key, I can say unwrap, but this will give me a very strange looking unwrap because basically Blender is incapable of unwrapping this because we haven't made any cuts yet. So in the ideal case, I would sit down and make cuts on all those edges where I want to fold it open. But obviously this will take a while. But there's like a cheap trick. So if you hit U, you can use what is called Smart UV Project. It will just look at all the edges in your file, and whenever the edge is sharper than 66 degrees, it will make a cut, and it will try to automatically generate your UV layout the best it can. And you can also tell it to keep between like the several pieces, and I will just hit OK and see what happens. And you can see, okay, Blender generated something that looks kind of okay-ish. Of course, if we did it manually, we might try to keep more pieces together. Like for example, this ring is completely separated. Maybe we could just cut it in one place. Let's see. But if I go and render now, it should already look much better. And we can see, okay, there's something wood-like appearing on it, but we can see that here there's an ugly seam. So this doesn't look nice. And that's because we just used the easiest way for creating a UV map. If we wanted to have it any better, we would have to spend more effort on making a proper UV map. And so people making video games, they normally have to unwrap everything they do. And after unwrapping like a few hundred objects, you get you get better. And there's a few tricks that you could use for quickly unwrapping something like this. One trick is you could, for example, start by just making an unwrap from view. So if I select project from view, Blender just takes the top surfaces, and all those little side squares, they're very, very narrow. And if I render this now, this, maybe I should add some more lights. Yeah. So now I can see that the top surface is perfect, but the side surface will be stretchy. There's going to be like just vertical lines because the image is just 1 pixel wide, and this is definitely not going to look great. But in some cases, the project from view is already a feasible option. I'm wondering why this line appears here. So I go over here. Don't really see where this line comes from. Yeah, that's important. And then like, yeah, or maybe let me quickly show you some other strategies. So let's say we have a sphere, and we all know the best way, or one of the ways to unwrap a sphere is our world map, which is, I'm sure Antonio knows what the name of this projection is. There's like a few different ways to unwrap a sphere. The one that most maps use is the one where I forgot the name, which
orthorhombic? No, I don't know in English. Orthorhombic. Orthorhombic.
Orthorhombic. Yeah.
I don't know if it is in English, this name.
Yeah. So if you unwrap a sphere in Blender, I think the default, like if you hit the U key, there's already a sphere projection. And if you choose this one, it kind of looks like the, I guess, orthorhombic one, which is the way we unwrap our world map, which has some issues because some parts get smaller. I think Brazil is too small on the map, and I think also the poles get quite distorted. So it doesn't show you the real sizes, but at least left, right, up, and down is kind of consistent. And so if I apply an image to this one, let's take the wood. And now we look at our sphere. And of course I have to add the image. So I go shader editor, select my cube, an object, don't see anything. What's wrong? I don't have a material, so I have to add a material. And I add my texture, which is the image texture. And now I can choose the image and connect it to the base color. And now we have a wood texture on our sphere. And if we look closely, we will see a seam somewhere. Right now, I don't, but we can tell that it's very stretched up here. And I don't see the seam, but I'm sure there is one somewhere. So if you look at the UV map in the UV editor, there's some additional features that you can use. So ideally, you want a UV map where each square millimeter on your object has 1 square millimeter on your bitmap. But sometimes you can tell, especially in the poles, our picture gets distorted. So up here, those very close to the center, those pixels up here, they don't get very much space on the bitmap. It's a very small area, and this is why our texture looks kind of distorted up here and also down here, because there's simply not enough information in the picture. So, and if you use the N key for opening this numerical panel in the UV editor, you can go to View, and in Overlays, you can click on Stretching, and this will crash Blender. Great. Sorry, I have to restart. I make my sphere again. And I divide my screen, go to the UV editor, I go into edit mode, I unwrap it with a spherical projection, and I load my image, which is lost now. Maybe I take another image just for a change. Oh, you can also show previews of your images. Here's a filter. Here you can choose the columns. And there should be a way of showing like small thumbnails, which has also changed a few times. Display mode, thumbnails. Oh yeah, let's take the train. And I will just quickly go to the shader editor and material and add my texture. Okay, this is going a lot slower than I expected, but since I've been doing this like 10 times now, I'm sure in the meanwhile you know how to apply an image texture to an object. And let me shade it smooth. Okay, so here's my train on the sphere. And I go back to the UV editor, and I wanted to show you that in view what's it? View overlay stretching. Yeah, finally. So this gives you a representation of like if everything's blue, this means that there's no stretching, and the brighter the colors get, the more stretching we have. So we can tell that those faces are really stretched. Those are like longly stretched, and this basically tells us that our UV layout is not very good, but there's only so much you can do with a sphere. So yeah, this is just a little hint to check your UV layout by turning on the stretching. And another thing that might be interesting, but let's do a model that we can all work on. So I hope you still have your file from last time. So I will open the gingerbread man that we made, I think, in the second class. Do you still have this model, or should I choose something different? Yeah, yeah, perfectly. Suzanne, okay, Suzanne, everybody has. We could also have a quick look at Suzanne's UV layout. Suzanne already comes with a pre-made UV layout. So if I add Suzanne and I switch to the UV editor on the right and I go to edit mode, you can see Suzanne already comes beautifully unwrapped. It's not perfect. If we check the stretching, view overlays stretching, you can see there's some issues, but I guess it's a reasonably good unwrap for Suzanne. And of course, we could apply an image texture now. Let's make a new one again. So I call it UV grid, and we make it this. And again, go to materials, make a new material, go to the shader editor, add a new texture. and connect it to the base color, and take our UV grid, switch to material preview, and here we can see that this looks kind of good. The ears have more detail than some other parts. Let's have a look at this with the subdivision surface. Shade it smooth. So this is the standard UV layout for Suzanne. We could try to make it better, but I'm afraid this is not going to be so easy. Yeah, maybe let's stick with Suzanne. If you don't have this guy anymore, then Suzanne might be a good substitution. And let's have a look at the UV editor again. And I quickly wanted to show you like a few things. Well, we know that the eyes are separated anyway, so they appear as separate objects. But we can tell that we have two big islands. And one good thing to know when you're working with those islands is that you can just single click one vertex and hit the L key, and this should highlight your whole island. But this doesn't work if you have this one up here selected. Let's see if I can make this any better. So if I turn this one off, I hit the L key, now it selects my island. So this one synchronizes the vertex selection between the left side and the right side. But it kind of interferes with the linked. So if I want to, let's say I want to move this island to somewhere else, I could just use the G key, and like all our usual commands from 3D modeling, they also work in the UV editor. So I can scale, I can rotate, I can use for having the non-proportional edit, and there's this is all the way. Like those commands are just used everywhere in Blender. And let's say we want to know what this is, and I guess it's the ears. So if we select something in here, we can tell, aha, this is our ears, and it looks like the ears are separated. So if I select one with L, then we can tell that there must be like a seam going around somewhere here that cuts off the ear. And this is the hole where it connects to. And we could decide that we might want to change this. So we could like reattach the ear. Maybe we make a cut so that this one could fold open, and then we could like fold the ear open and put it in there. And there's all kinds of tools for stitching seams back together. So you could select the ones here and there and say stitch, and it would put them back together. Then sometimes you have the problem that, let's say I have the eyes, and they might be incredibly small, and if I wanted to scale everything but keep the eyes in place, I would pin the eyes, and now if I scale those here with the O key, sorry, if I the pinned vertices, they would stay in place even if I make another unwrap. So let's say I make another cut up here, which already exists. Let's make a cut here. So I Control E to work, edge mark scene, and I unwrap, this would normally completely destroy my UV layout and it would move everything to somewhere else. But since I pinned the eyes should stay in its place. And right now, nothing really changes. Yeah. Okay, I was more prepared for the gingerbread man unwrap, but if you don't have it, of course, it's not of much use. What else do I have to say about maybe texturing? Ah, yeah, of course. And so once we have our model UV unwrapped, we can also use texture painting. So I leave edit mode. I have a picture that is associated to my model, and I switch from object mode to texture paint. So whenever you want to texture paint, you need a UV layout. It's not, it could be just, remember the one that we, that is just, you could just do the smart UV project. Also, there's the light map pack. So there's some automatic ones that just, let's try this one. Okay. So this is not as beautiful as the one we just had, but it's not always necessary for texture painting. So let's try the light pack map. This looks a bit different, but this might also work. So it doesn't really matter what type of unwrap you use, as long as you have one. And now I can switch back to texture paint. So it's in the, just like Franco left, it's just like switching between object mode and edit mode. You can also switch to texture paint mode. You can see now that our original bitmap got a bit distorted, but doesn't matter because we're going to paint over it now. And if I just take, right now my color is white, and if you see that while painting on the 3D model, it's painting on all kinds of different spots in our texture, but we don't really care because this is not going to be it's not going to be visible in the end. And so here we can just paint like in Photoshop or in any other drawing program, and we can change the brush size and the color, maybe make some red color, a smaller radius, and we can just hand paint Suzanne. And we're constantly painting over the seams, but since this and there's lots of seams, but we don't care because with the paint we can just hide all the seams, and yeah, and this makes it much easier. We can also we have different brushes that we could use. So if I click on this one, no, where is it? Let me see. Ah, here, brushes. Oh. Ah, you have the different mix modes. Like this would give me a list of brushes actually. Not sure what I'm doing wrong. Yeah, let's stay with this brush for the moment. If we go over here, we can also choose a texture. But right now we don't have any textures defined. So we have to go down here to the texture editor, to the texture properties. And a texture could be any image. It could be one that is generated or one that we drew or that we took a photo of. So the default one is image or movie, where we would have to load picture. But we can also choose those generative pictures. I will pick clouds, for example. And now if I paint, it will draw this cloud pattern onto the onto the 3D object, or we could choose magic is kind of funky. So this gives us something like this. Or I really take an image or a movie, and I will just paint on the UV grid, and then, oh no, this is our texture. Let's take a real image. Maybe take the train again, and now I'm painting trains onto Suzanne. Of course, I could change the size. And I can also change the type of brush. So if I go to stroke, space is like the default one, where we just repeat like the image several times. But if I choose anchored and click and drag, I just drag open like one picture and make it big. In this case, I would have to go to the mapping and make my picture a bit bigger. Oh no, I can't. No, can't go smaller than 1. Yeah, so I go to clip, and now it will only draw one picture, which it doesn't. Oh. Yeah, I'm doing something wrong. Not sure what it is. But yeah, just to let you know that you can use a picture as a brush, and then when you draw, you can paint this picture onto your model. Okay, I would also blaming this on WebEx again, but somehow my Blender is not working the way it's supposed to work. Let me try with another texture. Ah, this works. Doesn't like the train. Okay. Yeah, so even if you have a UV map that is not very good, you can kind of fake it by painting over the seams so you don't see them so much. And this is what I would recommend to Nadi. So you just make the standard, the very simple UV map layout, like this one here, Smart UV Project. And if there's really some places where you where the seams are too visible, you could use the texture paint and paint over the seams and hide them. If you take this a bit further, then you get to something like this. Maybe you recognize this guy. So this is a very simple 3D model, and this was in 2014, I think, in Feb 12 in China. And I asked Neil if I could take a photo of him, and he agreed. And so we made a paper mask of Neil. I also have one of Luciana and some others. And if you look at the UV layout, you can see that this is not very nicely, but kind of nicely unwrapped. And for this, I was using the paper model plugin, which you can find here. You just download the zip file from GitHub and then install it in the add-on manager in Blender. And yeah, I will put it on my website so you can play around with Neil's model and Luciana's a little bit if you want. In this case, I was using a technique where one of the brushes in the texture paint is a clone brush, and you can make several unwraps where one is just a front view, one is a side view, and one is this one where you properly unwrapped it. But you can clone brush from one view to the other. So I took the photo with the front, and while I was clone brushing onto Neo's face, it would automatically draw the texture at the right spots in the other UV map. But yeah, this takes a little while. But if you want, I would be happy to do a little workshop in making funny paper models. Maybe I can show you some more nonsense. If you ever want to see me with boobs, this is the paper mask that we made in Barcelona of myself. This one is still standing there somewhere on a shelf saying, this paper mask is just like Ferdy. Ugly on the outside and hollow inside. And I think I also have a little let me see if I find this. I'm just trying to document this a little bit. And this is Luciano wearing Neil's mask and dancing to Chinese music. So yeah, if you're up for a little paperhead tutorial, I would be happy to make another session. Maybe let's take a short break. Now it's 7:45. Should we just continue at 8? See if I can find you.
For me, it's okay.
Yeah. So I will quickly pause the recording.
Okay.
And I just quickly wanted to show you the one thing that I didn't manage just a moment ago. So I made this cube and I unwrapped it. I applied a texture to the base color, and I entered into.
Ferdy, you're not showing your screen yet.
I'm always doing it wrong. Now you can see it, no? I hope so. So I took a sphere, I unwrapped it, I applied a texture to the base color, and now I'm in texture paint. And you can see the two settings for your brushes also here or up there. And in this case, I want to use a texture, which in this case is it's a picture of me. And the one thing I was doing wrong was here it has to be in view plane. And now I can just click and drag, and it will project this image just from the view. This is great if you want to apply, let's say, a sticker to your object. You can just paint it on. Okay. Any more questions on UV layouts? I think we spent too much time on this already. Yeah, if you have some more questions, then this is the time. If not, I would just continue with a little fluid simulation. Does this sound fun? Okay, so we start our default scene and we go down here to where it says physics properties. And there we select fluid. And in fluid type, we select domain. You can also follow those steps here on the website. So the domain is the object inside which our simulation is going to take place. And fluid simulations and smoke simulations, they all work with voxels. And here we can see the size of one of those voxels. And it's going to fill this entire volume with voxels. And this is where the simulation is going to take place. Then I want to add an icosphere. So Shift A, Mesh Icosphere. And I scale it by 0.3. So S0, 3. S0.3. And I move it up by 0.5 Blender units, so GC 0.5. And I look in the front view, so we can see we have a cube with a sphere inside. And if it doesn't look the same in your place, then it's probably because you're still... Oh no, okay, all good. Can't really see you now. Ah, here. Yeah, everybody good so far? Andre, Antonio? Okay. All right. So we have this one, which is defined our domain, and now we select the sphere. We click on fluid again. And this time in type, we don't choose domain, but we choose flow. And in flow type, instead of smoke, we select liquid. And then we scroll all the way down. Oh no, yeah, that's it. That's it for the sphere. And we go back and select the domain. And here in domain type, we have to switch to liquid as well. And all the way on the bottom, I choose, instead of OpenVDB, I choose Unicache. Okay, so it's just like for the domain, we just choose domain and liquid and Unicache, and for the sphere, it's flow and liquid, and that's it. Yeah. Okay, so now I switch to wireframe mode by hitting the Z key and going to wireframe. And we can see that our sphere has changed color. And if I hit the play button, you can see that the simulation is taking place. And there's lots of little particles that simulate water. Hope this looks the same in your place.
Ferdi, did you choose the number of particles? I didn't get it. Oh, okay.
No. This is determined by
the volume and the
amount
size,
of
the size of particle, the particle. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there's two types of simulating water in Blender. One is this one with the particles, and then there's one where we can actually make a mesh. So if you select the domain and then scroll a little bit down, so this is what we're doing right now, the liquid. And if we go further down to mesh and select this one, and I click on the left arrow button to go to the beginning. Yeah?
Sorry, Ferdi, I lost it after Unicache, because I click play and nothing happens. So can you just show me after you chose Unicache, and then you went to your site, and then when you came back, I lost it. Sorry. Just the final step to put it to work. I believe it's step.
I think there wasn't, like Unicache was the last step before hitting play. Maybe try switching it back to OpenVDB and go to the beginning and hit play and see if anything's behaving differently.
Where are you hitting play? So I'm losing that.
Play is either the space bar or is here at the bottom of the window.
Yeah, on the animation, but it's okay. Okay, let me see. Something's wrong here. Check.
And so if we select mesh, it will actually create a mesh for each frame. Like the first time it runs, it's a bit slow, but the next time it should be faster. And all of this is cached in this folder. So this folder might quickly grow in size. So you should be kind of conscious that we're generating gigabytes of data right now. So one mesh for each frame, and we have 250 frames. And we're still at the lowest resolution. So once you increase the simulation resolution, you can quickly fill your hard drive. So be aware if you're low on disk space, maybe you go a bit slower or you don't increase the resolution. But right now we have a mixture of fluid, of those particles, and of our mesh. So I will pause and I will turn off this one that says liquid. So now I just see the mesh. I leave, I go back to solid mode and I shade it smooth, which is just for the beauty. And I also want to get rid of the sphere up here. So I just select it and hit H for hiding it. And now we should have a fluid simulation that is like less particle based, but it's actually a mesh for each frame.
When I shifted, sorry, Ferdi again. When I shifted to Unicache, my cube became opaque, so it became shaded again like a normal cube. The effect wasn't the same. Maybe I lost a step, but I don't believe so.
Yeah, to be honest, like there used to be like in this folder that is, or in this submenu that is called cache, where I have to select my domain. Like here, there used to be some more controls. So there was you can tell that when it's running, sometimes it runs a bit slow, because it's still filling the cache with all those images. And once the cache is full, it runs a lot quicker. And there used to be a setting where you could just say delete cache. So if you deleted it, it would just regenerate everything you did. And somehow this button is gone. And the only way I found for clearing the cache is switching between OpenVDB and Unicache. And for me, sometimes it didn't work, but switching forth and back a few times here kind of solved the problem. So yeah.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, maybe just wait another minute, and I will show you a much easier way of doing the same thing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, so this is the basics of a fluid simulation. I think you saw the videos of like really amazing stuff that takes like several supercomputers a few months for rendering all of this. If you wanted to increase the resolution of I will just let it run to the end so we can see it once in running through. And the parameter that controls the resolution is right on top, the second one, or actually the first one. So if you increase this number, your voxel, like this one, will get smaller, but yeah, but also the file size will get bigger, and the time it takes to render it will get a lot bigger. So yeah, you might want to try increasing this to 64 or something. Or let me try 64. So now if I go back to the beginning, it's completely empty. And once I start, it will like slowly start to render all the frames. But you can tell that it's already going a lot slower. So if you put this to like 500, then you already need like a different computer from mine to render this. So fluid simulation is the easiest way to get even the biggest computer to its knees. Yeah, it changes a lot with the size of your domain. So the bigger your domain, the more calculation intensive this gets. By default, now it's already using adaptive domain, so it tries to identify where your action is happening and then reduces the size of the domain to fit more or less into the action. There's a factor for time scale. So if you wanted to do something like a slow motion shot, you would decrease the time scale. I can't tell you everything about all the little options there are, because there's a lot. And right now my computer is not very responsive. The thing we saw in the beginning with those colorful little particles, that's what they call the flip fluids. This is also still quite new and is a different approach to simulating fluids. Okay, I will stop. This takes too long, but you can tell that the resolution is a lot better. And of course, now you could apply a material like something transparent, like water. I don't know what this is, where it came from. Now we can see just like the first few frames look a lot better now. And of course, the higher the resolution, the smaller your voxels, the better your result, and the longer it takes. Okay, did at least some of you manage to do it? Okay, let me show you. Let's start with a new file.
Struggling with it, sorry.
Yeah. Before you struggle too much, let me show you another way of doing the same thing. But right now my computer is so slow that I can't even start a new file. Almost. Okay. So there's a quick trick, and it's hidden under. Oh, I'm going to Object, Quick Effects, and there's a Quick Smoke. So what those quick effects do is basically the same than what we did right now. It takes a cube, makes it a domain, adds another object, makes it the inflow. So if I go on Quick Smoke, I have to select my default cube, then Object, Quick Effects, I click it. And now if I hit play, I should get something very similar to what we just did. But this hides all the process, so it doesn't help you a lot. Of course, you could select the cube and go to the Physics tab and see, aha, this one is a domain and it's a liquid and resolution, and it's using the flip fluids. We could also change this one to use the mesh instead of the flip fluids, and yeah, so it's basically the same thing.
Where do you change from the mesh to the flip fluids and vice versa? Ah, it's there. It's that checkbox. Okay.
Yeah, there's a checkbox that says liquid. You uncheck this one, and then you check mesh a little bit further down. You found it?
Yeah, found it. Thanks.
This is going to be great for the 3D printing week, because it definitely generates a lot of geometry that is not fabricatable in any other way than 3D printing. But yeah, there's lots of very creative uses for the fluid simulation. And since we're already into simulation, let's start a new file. And let's try a smoke simulation. So we go Object, Quick Effects, Quick Smoke. And this does the same thing then for the fluid simulation. So it adds a cube, makes it a domain, adds another cube, makes it an inflow or a geometry object that is going to be smoke. And if we hit play, we should see a column of smoke rising. And once it hits like the edge of the domain, it will just stop. Okay, but since this doesn't look very great yet, I want to select the small cube, go into edit mode, tab key, and then I want to subdivide it, but since I don't remember the shortcut, I hit F3 and type subdivide, Control E, of course. And here we can choose if you want it to be a smooth subdivide or just like a split. So I increase smoothness to 1 and the number of cuts to 2. So I get something roughly sphere-like. Then I leave edit mode with tab. I scale it a bit smaller. And I start my smoke simulation again. And it seems like we're having the same cache problem. Yeah, I really have to find out how to eliminate the cache. Because right now the beginning is still playing from the old cache. And only now is it starting to simulate the new smoke. The old smoke is still there. But you can see that there's a column of smoke rising up. If I select the little sphere and go to the physics tab, then we can see this is an inflow, which means that there's constantly smoke coming after it. You could also make a geometry, which would mean that this is just a puff of smoke and it would probably rise up. And actually, if it rises up or falls down, depends on the initial temperature. So the current preset is that initial temperature is 1, and which is above 0, which means it's warm, and warm air goes up, so it will rise. If you change this to -1, our smoke will fall down. Right? No, it doesn't do what I want. But yeah, I will just use this dirty trick of switching forth and back between the two simulation types for deleting the cache. This is definitely not the right way to do it, but it works. Okay, so now I should see my smoke falling down. Fortunately, I don't see anything. Okay, somehow it doesn't want to fall down. So I will select my inflow object again and change initial temperature to 1 and see if it at least wants to rise up. Runs very fast. I can do my stupid switch trick again. Okay, somehow falling down didn't want to work, but rising up seems to be okay. And of course, we can also maybe could increase the resolution a little bit. Maybe I save this for a little bit later. And one thing that gives it extra detail, we should check adaptive domain. So this will reduce the size of our domain. You will see that in the beginning, it's going to be smaller and then grow once our object grows. Adaptive domain. Oh, here's the heat value. Yeah, I changed the wrong value. This is why it didn't work. So if I change this one to -1, it would go down. And I think here in noise, this is a cheap method of adding more detail. This also changed name a few times, so I hope it's the right one, but it's kind of increasing the detail on the smoke. And increases the detail without changing the simulation. So whenever we change the initial resolution, our our simulation will look completely different. So the way the vortices are building up might be completely different if you change the resolution, whereas this one will only change the detail. And let's try to animate the sphere in the middle. So I will just move it a bit further down to one corner. Move to frame 0 and set a keyframe. Then move to frame 50. Move my sphere and set another keyframe on location. Please break me if I'm going too slow, or tell me if you're getting bored. So frame 100, I move it the opposite corner. Again, I key, location. 150, G, move it, I key, location. And frame 200, go back, beginning. So now if I play my simulation, we should have the smoke being emitted from our moving sphere, which it doesn't. Now it does. Okay, something is weird with the way Blender caches now. You can tell now it's moving around, leaving a smoky trail. And of course, we can also change the color of the smoke. For some reason, in frame 1, no, that's all right. Okay. Just confused because the domain is changing size. So right in the beginning, you can choose the smoke color. So I make my smoke red for a change, and I will right-click on the smoke color and say Insert Keyframe. So now it's storing the color information. And I jump to frame 50, and I change the color to something else. And I right-click here, oops, yellow. And I set the keyframe here. Same for frame 100. And now let's have a look what our simulation looks like. It's still repeating the old one that we don't use anymore, but I have the feeling that it's soon going to switch. Yeah. But it still doesn't have the... now it changed color. Okay. Yeah, once I figure out how to deal with those cache problems, I will put it on the website. But you can tell that this is not exactly the the best for a workshop, because everything just takes ages. And we're still at the lowest resolution, which is not so spectacular. But once you want to get serious with simulation, you need a better computer. Any comments from your side? Okay, enough of this smoky business, but I think this at least allowed you to get an idea. If you want to increase the resolution, you have to select the domain and change this value that is on 32 in my case. Like starting from 90, you get like pictures that look good. Yeah. One good thing about Blender is that you can run it in parallel on several computers, and you don't need admin rights for installing Blender. You can just copy it. If you have like a computer room in a university or something, you can just go and stick a Blender in each computer and then make it network render, which is incredibly useful for stuff like fluid simulations or smoke simulations. Okay, maybe an easy one for finishing up. So let's make a new file, new general. And the default cube is selected. And I go to modifiers, add modifier, ocean. Okay, and we see that our cube changes for something a bit bigger. And this is Blender's ocean modifier or simulator. And so the very first one allows us to repeat this a few times. So this will tile seamlessly. Of course, it looks a bit fake if you go too big, but this just repeats the same simulation several times in the direction. Resolution, I think we can put this on 9 just right from the start. But right now, time is on 1, and okay, if we change time, we can see that something moves. But of course, we want to animate this. So we move our timeline to frame 1. Time is at 0, and we right-click on time, and we say Insert Keyframe. And we move to frame 250 just by clicking in the timeline. And then we enter, let's say, a value of 20, it will be 20 seconds. And we right-click and we insert another keyframe. So now when we move the timeline, it's gonna run through the simulation from 0 to 20 seconds. I hit play, we can see our ocean starting to move. But you can tell that it kind of starts moving very slowly and now it ends moving very slowly. If we want to make this a bit nicer, we split our window, we open the graph editor on the right side. And here we see our 2 keyframes for the time. But this is why it starts so slow and ends very slow. If we right-click and select interpolation mode and set it to linear, then we don't get this ease in and ooze out. Just put it on linear, you get a straight line. Now our simulation just runs at constant speed. Yeah. Okay, no complaints. So then I go back. I can just close this one. The next option is the depth, which is how deep our sea is. The more shallow it is, the more of like choppiness you get. Might make it more interesting. I'll change it to 100. But yeah, this is something you can just play around with. Size is just the size of our plane, which does not really affect anything else. You could also just scale it in object mode. But spatial size is what is actually defining the size of our simulation. So from here to here is 50 meters right now. You could make it, let's say, 100 meters, which would probably give us a bit more detail. Then there's a random seed, which just makes sure that not all the simulations look the same. And then I open waves. And now we can start increasing the wave size, which should give us something that already looks a bit more ocean-like. I have it on 4.4 right now. Of course, you could go much bigger. Or, yeah. I think somewhere around 5 is a good value. You can say how small the smallest wave is supposed to be, which would take away some of the detail. Choppiness defines how close those tips are allowed to get to each other. If you increase this over 1, you will get places where the mesh self-intersects, as you can see. So I would recommend you to stay under 1. And if you decrease it a lot, it will just round everything. So I think 1 is a good value. You can change the wind velocity, which will also affect the way that the waves form. But in this case, the alignment also matters a lot. So if we start to give it some alignment, we can see that now it starts to make waves that come from one side and roll over to the other. We can change the direction. So if I give this 45 degrees, it will go across our plane diagonally. And damping is just a value to to make it settle down a bit faster. And of course, you can apply materials to this plane and use all the rendering, how do you say, tricks for making good water. But that's a whole tutorial in itself. Since the more recent version, Blender also allows you to make foam. So let's say you have like a lighthouse that is standing in here and the water crashes against it and it splashes in all directions. So if you select foam, Blender will, like wherever there's like a lot of turbulence in the water, it will create a texture which gets mapped onto this mesh. And this won't be during, I know nowadays you could even see it like in real time. But formerly, this was more something you generate in the background, and then once you render, you would see the foam. And there's also, I think, Spectrum is. In Spectrum, this is also quite interesting. You can have a preset for like shallow water. Not so sure what this is for, and yeah, there's some presets for different types of oceans. And there's also one, I think it's spray. So it would also generate particle systems that would like spray even more water if you have like a crash on a lighthouse or something like this. And this is also using a cache. So this is the place where all of your meshes, it's one mesh per frame. So we just generated 250 meshes with relatively high resolution. So yeah, be aware of where your cache path is and that you don't run out of space. Or in the worst case, if Blender crashes, then your files stay in the cache and just waste disk space. So maybe check once in a while if this is empty if you're not using it anymore. And if you bake this, then all this rendering time would go away, and you would save all those meshes, and then you could quickly play them back. Oh yeah, here's the spray option. So if you have foam, you could also make spray, and this would generate the particle systems. Okay, any comments on that? Yeah, people are not very talkative today, which is a pity because I wanted to end today's class by having a little chat, just hearing your opinions of how good or bad this was. I feel today was a disaster, but maybe you can give me some advice on how to make this better.
Oh yeah.
No, not a disaster, Faraday. What are you saying? Perfect.
Thank you.
Don't worry.
You record the whole videos, so it's not a problem for us to watch it again, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we have different interests, so yeah, sometimes it's more important than on other times for us, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still so many things that we haven't even touched yet, like cutting videos with Blender, using camera tracking, like even though we covered some ground, this is still far from everything you can do in Blender. And I think there's many interests that we could still have a look. Like the new 2D animation stuff is super amazing. Maybe if you quickly make a new file, but this time not general, but you go on 2D animation.
Faraday, I have a quick question about one of the previous iterations. You were doing, for example, you were working with the liquid inside the confined element, like you had the domain. So the question is, how do we extract? I think this might be. How do we extract a keyframe, like the mesh calculated on that specific keyframe, in order to print it, like you said, for example?
Yeah. You just select it and click on File, Save As, selected object, and you have a mesh of your simulation.
On that specific keyframe, I
Yeah.
just export it. Okay.
Exactly. But this is only true for when you have the mesh simulation. For the smoke, this wouldn't work.
Okay.
For the water, it would. And I think there's ways. Yeah, this smoke is just really hard to convert to 3D printing. But there is ways where you can kind of define like a density threshold. So it will take anything that is below or above this threshold. But I've never tried.
Okay.
For water, it works nice. Once I printed like a vase that was just like, I made a bowl and let a sphere of water fall inside, and it would create this like splash thingy. And then I made a bowl that looks like a splash.
Yeah, I was thinking about that specific exercise.
Yeah, that's really fun and really easy to do.
Okay.
So I just quickly wanted to show you the 2D part of Blender. So if you switch on the window type, it's the no, actually, it's not a certain type of window. It's just that you select draw. So instead of edit mode, you select draw, and you get this white canvas. If you just start scribbling around, you get like a gray line. But here on the right side, you can select your brushes. So there's all kinds of markers, and I should be able to change the material color. Why not? But yeah, things change so fast that now I don't even know how to change the color. But bear in mind that this is vector graphics. So behind this, there's like a path being drawn. Like this is all based on what's called grease pencil. And the good thing about this, you can animate it. So you see that down here, there's already a keyframe set for the very first frame. And I could just copy everything and paste it at frame 20. Today nothing works. Shift-D? Yeah, Shift-D works. And so now my animation is quite unspectacular. But if I go now and there's also tools for moving the vertices. Which of course I don't find right now. But now you could draw like a different version of your strokes, and it would make a smooth animation between them. And this is a whole other, how do you say, yet another universe inside Blender that you could probably spend the next few years exploring. If you saw the hero animation on one of the Blender movies, this is all done exclusively in this 2D interface, and this opens like a lot of possibilities for doing yeah, 2D animations in Blender, which sounds fun. I think there were some younger participants as well. I would be very interested to know if this class is like kids compatible. Any comments on that?
Mine were here just you know, playing on the next computer. They weren't attending. They were just trying to take my attention out of the workshop.
So they already learned a little bit about Blender?
Yeah, the older one already learned a little bit, but he just plays, you know, he just plays around. He doesn't have the method. But he wasn't attending.
Okay.
The younger one was trying to make me not attend.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments, ideas?
It's okay.
I really like the course. Thank you very much. I think for me, I would have loved to see even more about creation of materials and how to, for example, do that with the nodes. For example, creating glass for creating the procedural materials and also rendering. So things, how to improve your renders. I had a lot of issues with fireflies, for example, these pixels because I was using not enough lights and a lot of glassy materials. And so in that sense, that's I think I'm using Blender a lot for, well, last week I used Blender for the sort of the rendering and the materials and the animations. So I would have definitely loved, yes, and things like that look amazing. That for me would have, I think, so seeing the smoke simulation and the fluid simulation, I think that was cool, amazing that it can do that, but I would have loved to have learned more about materials and more details about animations. I still, for example, I know how to do the keyframes, but like the next step, how do you easily delay multiple objects or without having to go through each of them separately? For example, like one tiny thing, these kinds of things. But that would just like the feedback on how to improve. I really, especially the beginning, that was good to follow. Only today was a little bit hard where I where I sometimes kind of lost it and at some point just started watching.
Okay, yeah, I'm taking notes and I will try to improve. Talking about materials, like one thing that I talked about with you already, but maybe not with the others. So today we saw that we have this UV unwrap and that it gives us some trouble for like how to do it properly, and there might be seams and all of this. There's another way of giving a texture to your models, which is not using pictures, but it's using generative imagery. So generative imagery is it's like an algorithm that creates a picture, just like when we made this new texture, like down here when I clicked on texture and then new, then there's one which is image or movie. This is the one that we use for UV texturing, but all those others, they are so-called generative images. So blend is just making a transition from black to white. Clouds is making some noise where you can change the size of the noise and you can change the color of the noise. And but this noise is infinite in three directions. So if you apply a noise texture as a material, you don't need to unwrap it and you don't have any problems with seams because it's infinite in all directions anyway. And you can use those different generative textures inside the node editor as well. And then you get like very complicated node setups that look, this one is harmless. There's some that like look like bushes inside of trees, inside of jungles. And some people get extremely creative by making those generative material setups. And this is so they decided to dedicate 1 month every year to making procedural materials, and they call it November. Basically, any software is allowed to participate. Blender is quite strong in this, but the master of nodes is Houdini. Maybe you remember the How to Animate a Cube movie that Neil showed in class, where inside there's a little steam engine that is actually simulating how the steam expands and drives a little locomotive that is moving the cube. But if you search for November in Blender, you can find a lot of very interesting stuff. Let me just show you one video. It's completely mind blowing. because nowadays you can also you can generate geometry like this as well, and just by clever ways of applying those nodes, you can make actual geometry. So your picture turns into like there's like if you look at this picture, you see that it's probably based on a sphere, but there's parts that are a bit lower and parts that are a bit higher. And normally you would do this by using a black and white texture, and you tell your sphere or your render engine that wherever the color is black, push it in a little bit, and where it's white, you push it out a little bit. And if you do this pulling and pushing in the right way, you can do actual animations. So if you look at this little video, you can see that sometimes this even takes like a completely different shape from what it actually started. So this the snowman, there is no 3D geometry. This is just like a clever application of math for generating the snowman. Like it's, once you understand what's happening, it blows your mind. Until then, it's just like a interesting snowman. But once you understand what's going on behind the scenes, you will start to admire the people that do this kind of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, this Amoebi is probably like, it would probably take me a year for replicating this, or even longer. And it goes very deep in math. Like the node setup for this one, it probably takes you a week just for placing all the nodes. And the good thing is that it's completely parametric. That's like parametric rendering. It's not parametric design, but parametric design and texture and color and density and like, yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, so Google video Google for November, like Simon Thomas, I think he's the one that actually implemented this in Blender. Yeah, they are amazing, and it blows my mind each time I see it. It basically, yeah, basically you start, you have your origin, and imagine like a color gradient that goes from the 0, 0 to the outside, going from white to blacker, and that's the basis of everything. And just from this black and white transition, they create like a universe. Yeah, if there's interest, I would be happy to share some of those node tricks. One of my Fab Lab fellows, he's also a Blender head, but he's scared of nodes. So I'm about to prepare like a little class to stop him from being frightened of nodes. And now what just entered into Blender like a few weeks ago is the geometry nodes, and I think you heard Neil being like, "What? Blender has geometry nodes?" So this makes it like Grasshopper, and yes, that's true. Blender had something Grasshopper-like, which is called Svershok. It's like the Russian translation for Grasshopper. It's extremely complicated, and the tutorials are from a Russian guy that if you listen to his English, you think he's like in 5th grade. But then if you realize the math that he's talking about, then you quickly realize that he's an absolute genius. And yeah, so so Svershop was great, but now we're gonna get something even better. It's just starting to grow.
It was clear to me why the geometry nodes was such a big deal for Blender. Does it have to do with the parametric design part?
Yeah, it basically allows you to generate geometry in a math way.
Okay. Cool.
not in the, like right now you have something like the, well, actually I'll show you one quick one just for saying goodnight. So I have my cube and I go to the modifiers and I choose the Array
Du musst den
Modifier.
Bildschirm teilen, Ferdi.
Ach, not once that I do it right, sorry. Okay, I start again. File, new, general, don't save. So I go to the modifiers and add an array modifier. And this is just a very simple modifier where you can tell it how many times it's supposed to repeat. And you can tell it which offset, so it can increase it a little bit. But it becomes much more fun when you, instead of using those coordinates, you add another object for defining the distance. So I go Shift A and I insert an empty, just plain axis. So an empty is like, sounds funny, but it's basically an empty object. It's just the origin. And so I select my cube again. And so instead of using the relative offset, I use object offset. And I select my empty as the object. And now if I move my empty, it will move all my cubes. Maybe let's add some more cubes. So right now I have 6. Let's make it 30. And now you will realize that if you scale your empty, then also your cubes will get smaller each time they go further away. And if I move my empty, all the cubes will move with it. And if I rotate my empty, then it will start to make like a little curl. And of course, I can also add another empty. Let's move it a bit to the side. And now I can make an array of my array. So I add another modifier, which is also an array modifier. But in this case, it's making an array of my existing array. Again, 30. No, 2. So I make it 30 as well. So now I get 30 arrays of arrays. And if I move my very first empty, all those arrays are going to move. And if I rotate my second empty, no, sorry, for the second one, of course, I still have to tell it that it's also an array, and that it's also using the object offset. So object offset, and I select my second empty as the object. And now I could try what happens if I move the second one a little bit up and to the side. So now all my arrays of arrays stack on top of each other. And I could also try rotating them around the z-axis. And it already starts to look quite funky. And yeah, and now we could just go wild and rotate either of them, and we get some very interesting geometry. Now I can't find my first. Here's the first one. Yeah, so this is just like, but this is not geometry nodes. Geometry nodes is exactly that, but we are not copying existing geometry, but we are creating geometry completely from scratch, just by math. And yeah, let me know if somebody manages to 3D print that. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this a little bit.
Definitely.
Let me know if you
Thanks.
need some help with your Blender project, and yeah, and if somebody's up for like making some paper masks, let me know and I will help.
Thank you very much, Ferdi.
Thank you very
Thank you for.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Danke.
Bye
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
bye.